Hello, people. This is Mark Smith with Family Tree Brand Life Coaches. Somebody had asked me a ways back to do videos on the dysfunctional family roles. And I have talked about the two roles that I had a lot of personal experience with, the family hero role and the lost child role. Today I'm going to talk about the third role, generally that's in order, and that's called the scapegoat role. And I've never really been a scapegoat in my family system, so I really haven't experienced it personally. But I dedicate this video to my late sister, Renda. You might be confused because I'm married to a woman named Renda. Her actual pronunciation of her word would be Renda with an I. Her name is spelled, my wife is R-I-N-D-A. My sister's name was R-E-N-D-A. But she played the role of the scapegoat, and I wanted to honor her and talk about what a beautiful, wonderful person that she was. And the title of the video is The Life-Destroying Role of the Family Scapegoat. So, my sister, Renda, she went from being the golden child as a little girl because there were three boys and along came a girl. And she definitely was the golden child. I remember at one point she had this huge bedroom and brand new furniture and a 4-poster bed, while my little brother Sam and I sort of shared a closet, or not a closet, it was a hallway. But then my sister Renda had to be in the same classroom. My mother had kids right after another. And she was in the same grade and the same classroom as the ultimate golden child, Sammy, the child between me and Renda. And he was brilliant, and he was, he wasn't the valedictorian. I think he was next in line, salutatorian, I think it's called. But he was driven and smart and editor of the newspaper. And in our family, there were two family heroes at the beginning of the family. Chuck was sort of the extra father, and I was like an extra mother figure, if you will, a nurturing figure, and a lost child. And then my little brother Sammy was the golden child. And then came Renda. She drew the short straw. Many times the scapegoat is the second oldest child. The family hero comes along, and then the scapegoat comes along, and they can't compete being good, so they just get attention by being bad. But that really wasn't me, because there were 7 kids and there was so much parenting that needed to be done. I became a lost child and an extra parent. And I never really rebelled. Back in my high school days, there was this place called Cat's Corner, because we were the Kokomo Wildcats. And Cat's Corner was a place across the street where you could go and smoke cigarettes. And my sister, when she got to high school, she had given up trying to compete with Sammy. And she would go out and smoke cigarettes at Cat's Corner. She started smoking at a very early age. And whereas my 2 brothers and I, all family heroes, none of us have ever smoked. And then there were 4 sisters in a row who suffered, several of them, from bipolar disease, which runs in the females in my family, in some of them. So my beautiful sister Renda chose drugs and smoking and rebelling over my chief addiction from 17 to 30 was a really unhealthy version of Christianity. I was getting high on Jesus. I was a religious addict. So whenever you're the scapegoat, you generally don't go to college or you fail out of college because you're busy partying. So the biggest way that being a scapegoat harms you is career-wise and money-wise. Because rarely does a scapegoat finish college and they end up in jobs that are below them in terms of their capabilities and their intellect, but they just don't follow through on the training because their attitude to the world is, fuck you, I don't want to follow the rules. I'm a rebel and I want to party and use drugs and I don't care about school. And then, so while my older brother was a super successful executive, and I've been pretty successful as a counselor and have owned my own practice since '89 with a lot of therapists I've trained and work with me. And my younger brother's a multi-millionaire and probably one of the best commercial real estate agents in Indianapolis. And then the sister after Renda became a very successful lawyer in town before some health problems interfered. And then the youngest sister, of course, was little baby Lisa, who died when I was taking care of her when I was 10. And then a sister in between, Elizabeth, was a bit of a mascot and a bit of a lost child whose life was ravaged by bipolar disorder. But I'm glad to report that in her late 40s, early 50s, she has gotten on some good medication, and she's gone to nursing school, and she's a nurse now. After decades of not functioning, she's a nurse. She's become the matriarch of our family system. She hosted Thanksgiving this Thanksgiving. I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud. Even if your issues take you out and set you back for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you can make a comeback and you can thrive even after 20, 30 years of, having life really set you back. So my sister hurt her foot, her ankle, and then she was prescribed painkillers and she became addicted to them. And when you add bipolar disease to an addiction to painkillers, it tailspinned her into, a psychosis, and she lost her job. And while she was driving somebody else's vehicle in Tulsa, Oklahoma in March of 2008, the story I heard was that her purse fell over and she was reaching for her purse, and there were prescription drugs that were illegal in the car, and she had a wreck, and she died. And this was just at a time where I was going through my first little round of narcissistic abuse. It was so painful, but I had no idea I had so much more pain coming. But God bless Renda. She had a solid, workable marriage with a very good man, an empath, a lovely man from Iran. And she produced 2 amazing children. When I was home during Thanksgiving, Leah, my 30-year-old niece, the daughter of Renda, we were on the same basketball team, and we were taking on young men, niece or nephews and friends, and we kicked all the asses and went 6-0. And she's quite a good basketball player. So I'm so proud of Renda for overcoming her multiple difficulties of her unfortunate role in the family, being right after the golden child, and playing the role of a scapegoat, and having bipolar disease, and also as part of all that, developing a drug addiction and experiencing early death. But she still has the legacy of great love and respect in my family. She has the legacy of a loving man who hasn't remarried, who honors her, and she has the legacy of two amazing kids. My nephew Ryan is completing pharmacy school, and he's going to be a pharmacist. So, okay, now I'm going to read some quotes about the role of the scapegoat. This one is from Dysfunctional. No, this is from Out of the Storm. It was called. It's a blog. In a narcissistic, abusive family, the scapegoat, or the no good child, is the recipient of the narcissist's negative projections. They can never do anything right. The name rebel implies that the child has chosen this role, which is debatable. I don't think any of us choose our family roles. I think they're chosen for us. They just hang out there naturally fitting, and there's not a lot of choice involved in it. We get railroaded into it. The scapegoat is usually the victim of emotional and physical abuse by the narcissistic parent. So, I'm not sure how projection worked, as Renda was the first daughter. I know that she was a favorite of my grandmother, and she was the golden child early. So I don't know sometimes you just don't know why people end up in these roles. But in this case, it probably had a lot to do with being in the same classroom as Sammy. This is a longer quote by Leanne Chapman, where I think she's written a book called Step Out of the Scapegoat Role. Leanne Chapman. Did you know the word scapegoat came originally from a ceremonial practice where a goat was sacrificed for the sins of the people, and another goat was then loaded up symbolically with the sins and sent out into the wilderness alone to perish? The goats themselves were considered pure, and the shame and sin of the people were transferred onto these innocent creatures to carry. There are many innocents who carry the blame for others. It allows groups of people, families, or whole nations to project their own prejudice and aggressions away from themselves. It is very painful. It's a very painful role to play. If I had to pick a role to play, it wouldn't be scapegoat. It probably would be family hero, as hurtful and damaging as the family hero role is. But at least when you get in recovery, you got a good job, usually as a family hero. It's a very painful role to play. However, family therapists believe the scapegoat is often the healthiest member of the family, because they aren't complicit in denying the dysfunction. So, my mother was considered, to be batshit crazy, yes, but she was the Center Township trustee. My dad had worked steadily in his career, and he was a sweet, mild-mannered man, whereas Renda did drugs, so she was considered a darker character than those two, but she was carrying their shit. In other words, the scapegoat knows the truth about the family and how dysfunctional the family is, and they don't try to act like their shit don't stink. As myself being a family hero and a lost child and a religious addict, I was buffered from the truth. I didn't realize how dysfunctional I was because I had Jesus. I couldn't be dysfunctional. I had me some Jesus, whereas she used drugs, so I must be better than her, but Jesus was my drug. And I was never better than my sister Renda. This is a long quote from a Psychology Today blog by Andrea Matthews, and called The Scapegoat Identity. Persons whose lives are run by the emotional blackmail of guilt have what I call the scapegoat identity. As a naturally sensitive and empathic child grows up in a home with parents and others who cannot be wrong. That's one of the strongest traits of my family system is nobody can be wrong. When I was struggling and my hands were shaking playing cards over Thanksgiving, it's because my nephew, he couldn't be wrong, I couldn't be wrong, and it was friction in the room. So you grow up in a home where parents and others cannot be wrong, who blame the child for things they themselves have done, or who have otherwise refused to take responsibility for their own inner lives. The child may begin to empathize with them and then carry and identify with all the unresolved shame floating around in the home. So initially, many times the scapegoat is an empath who sees the craziness and the pain and then takes it on. Sensitive and empathic children, not having been taught how to use empathy, can be used and abused by family members, whether intentionally or unintentionally, as the carrier of the sins of the family. Children are seeking mirrors that define them. If the only mirror is one that defines the child as the guilty party or the student who isn't smart, the student that can't compete with her older brother, or the responsible one, a sensitive child who longs for connection will begin to define herself accordingly. As that child grows, she will encounter more and more of the world, but will come from the same exact dynamic established at home. Why? Because she has identified with this way of interacting. She thinks it's who she is. She's defined as bad, so she thinks she's bad, so she acts even badder. She's the guilty one, the one who must consistently take responsibility for others' emotions and sins, because this is just what she does. She cares a great deal for others as a natural part of her authenticity, but this caring has been contorted by this defined identity into carrying. They don't empathize so much with the dysfunction, they carry it. So now this child whose gift was to be empathetic has now been cursed. Being a scapegoat is certainly being cursed. It's, I think, the most life-destroying role that you can have. Being a lost child really sucks, but you're out of the line of fire. You're laying low. Whereas a scapegoat is getting arrested, going to jail, getting kicked out of school. She will not use her empathy as recognition of what others are feeling and the ability to mirror that back to them so that they can use that information for their own growth. She will use her gift of empathy to carry others' burdens of guilt, responsibility, and emotion, and in so doing, she will somehow prove to herself that she is not the bad person that she senses that she is. So, poor scapegoats. It just breaks my heart that my sister Renda wasn't in her own classroom because she was smart. If I'd have been in a classroom with Sammy, I'd have been the scapegoat too, because I'm not as smart as he is, not nearly. I have other skills and abilities, but I wouldn't have done as well in school. I didn't. And it's just sad that it really contributed to an early death and destroyed what could have been. She could have been a doctor, she could have been a lawyer, and instead she, was a buyer for food in a cafeteria at a hospital. The sense of unworthiness carried deep within and below every good deed done by the scapegoat originates from having carried the guilt and responsibility for others' sins. This child has taken on the wrongs and sins as if they should indeed belong to her. The sins of the fathers shall be visited upon the children and upon the children's children to the third and fourth generation. The Bible says twice in the Old Testament. My father's mother gave birth to him when he was 12, and she was being statutory raped by a man, an Italian man, who was in his late 20s, I believe, and who eventually went to jail for doing that to another young woman. And then my father was beaten by his stepfather. And then my grandmother was seduced by the man that she was the nanny for of the family, which produced my mother. And then my mother spent the first, it was either 3 or 5 years in an orphanage, because a woman can't have a child and be a single mother back in the 1950s. So off she went to an orphanage, and where she was so damaged and disconnected that, she ended up damaging her children. So those are sins, and not sins, but dysfunctions that went from generation to generation to generation. And my sister Renda was taken on the dysfunction of my great-grandparents, my grandparents, my parents, and the rest of the family, even though she was one of the sweetest, best persons that I'd ever known. This child has taken on the wrongs and the sins as if they should indeed belong to her, and she feels this sense of wrongness as if it actually defines her. She is now officially the scapegoat, for she has taken of the sins of others away. So, folks, if you're in your 30s and 40s and 50s and you've played the role of the family scapegoat, and you don't have very much education, and you have an addiction, and you don't have a very good job, you don't have to continue to carry the sins of your family and be the scapegoat. Get in recovery for your scapegoatness, and stop acting bad as a prescription to making others in your family feel better. And get your education even in your 40s, and become a nurse, become a teacher, become a banker, become a therapist. Many scapegoats who became alcoholics then go on and become counselors to work with alcoholics. My therapist, Rick Gustafson, who was, instrumental in my recovery for years, he was a cocaine addict who then got a master's in social work and got in recovery and was clean and sober for many, many, decades. And he went from being the scapegoat to being a really powerful healing force in our community for sobriety and for emotional health. So learn more about the role of scapegoat you can read Sharon Wegschneider's book on the topic, about the first book written on it, called Another Chance. And you can watch a lot of videos on YouTube about the scapegoat role. But redemption is at hand. You don't have to continue to carry the shame and blame of your family. You don't have to continue to rebel and be the bad guy just because your parents couldn't own their issues and they couldn't be vulnerable and human. Instead, they have to cast it off on you. So if you have that, bring it up with your therapist. Read the book that I suggested, Another Chance by Sharon Wegschneider-Cruz, and watch a lot more videos, because you don't have to be bad. You don't have to carry anybody's shame. And it's never too late to have a happy childhood. It's never too late to have a new, fresh career and be like my sister Beth, who in a way became another scapegoat in the family. And now she's a superstar because she found redemption and she found positive energy even into her late 40s, early 50s. So God bless you, scapegoats. I love you. And I'm sending you release from shame, release from guilt, and blessing. So if you haven't joined and subscribed to our YouTube channel, do that. And then Tuesday nights and other times when we go live, you'll be notified and you can participate in our community. We have a wonderful recovery community, and we chat with each other and we visit and support each other every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And also I have 6 books on recovery, on shame, on healing affairs, on abandonment issues, and on narcissistic abuse at familytreecounseling.com. Thank you for watching today. I wish you healing and recovery and the freedom to not be the scapegoat anymore. God bless.